Our theme for the beginning of the morning will be human capacity, communication, and student research. Starting to emerge from a conference like this, making the transition from the deep dive out of a conference can be akin to experiencing the bends. So it is our intention today to try and set the scene for ways that we can transition you skillfully into the next phase of your life, wherever that takes you when you leave Boulder. So a few very quick announcements. We hope to see all of you at the Fisk Auditorium this evening, 5:30 to 6:30 are refreshments, followed at 7 p.m. at the planetarium. That promises to be a really, really enriching presentation, touching again with John Tewksbury, who was with us earlier this week. So we hope to see you there. Sue, you wanted to say a word about roundtables.
Good morning, everyone. Our morning roundtable tomorrow will take place at 7:30. So come on over and enjoy it. Same place. Tree house room. Come grab your breakfast and come on and join us. Thanks. Question? On Saturday, they don't open until 10? Oh, super. Thank you. Great.
Excellent. Join Sue at the round table tomorrow morning. All right, so we have the wonderful, wonderful opportunity to start today with a celebration of students. And so to that end, as you heard last night, we had 2 of our 3 students who were awarded this year are here present at the conference, and we're going to hear from 2 of them. I'm going to begin by introducing you to Skylar Perkins, winner of our Vickers Award for 2016. Skylar.
Mic on. Cool. Awesome. Okay, so this is a pretty big title, bringing forth the ecological economy. Don't get your hopes up. I'm just kidding. And so the 2 main themes running through my presentation and my experience, one with learning about second-order cybernetics and systems theory, and the other about studying ecological economics. And I'd say that there was a mutual influence in terms of my learning process. So I'm calling this my downward spiral into cybernetics. I have yet to say thank you so much for the award, and I was reading last night a little bit about Sir Vickers, and I realized that we had this commonality because he had to interrupt his education to fight in a war, and my education got totally interrupted by studying cybernetics. So, yeah. So first, I'll just go through some of my basic understandings. This Laws of Form by George Spencer Brown has been really informative for me, and the way I came to think about this could be illustrated most easily with myself in the world, and I'd say we could call this I am the relationship between myself and the world. And in this, we find this recursive process where I am not a fixed object and the world is a fixed object, but we are both bringing each other forth in a mutual recursion. I think this gets illustrated through these various systems concepts. I've called this the Holy Trinity of Cybernetics, where we have same, difference, and same difference. That got a better laugh in the other presentation. We see this recursive function in fractals, in various attempts to map 2 mutually observing systems. Heinz von Foerster in Unconstructing a Reality, where we see a sensory motor feedback loop occurring in both directions, 1 contextualizing and 2 in interaction. Autopoiesis, where you have this network of interactions giving rise to the network of interactions recursively. So my question is, where can this be applied? And there's this hesitancy to take these really clearly defined approaches, such as autopoiesis, and call a social system autopoietic. And at the same time, I felt that this inherent part of observation, that distinction between the observer, the fact that when we draw a distinction, we're making that implicit value difference between two states of the world, can be applied anywhere. The question is in formalizing it. In this case, ecological economics is kind of delving into these more philosophical elements. And so I thought that second-order cybernetics and systems theory really fits in that context. So this is the basic worldview of ecological economics, the economy as a subsystem of the greater ecosystem. And in attempting to formalize that perspective, regulate it, you get all of this complexity. And so it's come to be understood as trying to integrate ecology and economics. And this gives us a really clear example where we have one world, another world, and their interaction. So we can define ecological economics by the belief that the economy as a subsystem cannot grow indefinitely into a larger containing ecosystem. And Mulligan writes, even when the ecological economics literature has used scale as a proportional relationship between the economy and the ecosystem, it has been in metaphorical and dialectical terms rather than as an empirical and analytical tool for practical environmental policy. So how do we make that happen? Here we have the case of the economist trying to say that the ecosystem is a part of the economy, and the ecologist trying to say that the economy is part of the ecosystem. And I'd say that when, at least in the initial conditions, neither was fully equipped to deal with the other within their own domain. And this gives rise to a recursive action. So we could think of many examples where the economy tries to model the ecosystem, but ultimately is dealing with a self-relation. So I like this quote by Louis Hoffman. Pre and post conditions occur in a circularity wherein one may indeed describe a world that divides itself into a part that is seen and a part that sees in an endless round. So an example of this is if we try to define sustainability by the market prices, when we draw a distinction, we put a value on a piece of the ecosystem, that necessarily changes the economy, which is putting a value on this ecosystem, which changes the value of the ecosystem, which changes the value of the economy and around. I think a whole other talk would be to look at how you actually draw these distinctions and draw these boundaries. Who is responsible for drawing these boundaries? What are the values implicit in that? And that's not my topic here, but that's where it really starts to get interesting. We see the same thing when we try to draw the economy within a model of the ecosystem. And this is, for instance, formalized by Deepak Mulligan, where we find that optimal scale, the value of the economy to the larger ecosystem, is a function of that ecosystem. And so if distribution describes the socio-ecological system, optimal scale is a function of distribution is a function of scale, and they go again in a recursive round. So here we are, we're defining the boundaries, defining the value, which define the boundaries. One more technical point, we can think of a 3D vector space where we have scale, distribution, and allocation as three sort of optimizations. We can imagine our path through that vector space, but what happens is as we travel through it, we're changing the parameters which define the vector space. And so instead of sort of, an easy, simple course through that, we find this distribution of possible trajectories. And so I started getting interested in what this process could look like, how you can have this sociological system which is defining boundaries, which then becomes combined with a system which can define scale, distribution, and allocation formally. So in that we have activities. Every time we apply some measurement of scale, allocation, or distribution, it becomes embodied in the activities, the institutions, the regulatory mechanisms, even the modeling play a role in this. So real quick, really profound influence for me was this experience in Brazil. It was a sort of participatory action research based. And what we have is the Atlantic forest. And the Atlantic forest is this beautiful forest, that one of the most biodiverse rich forests in the world. Starting in about the 1500s, the Portuguese arrive, and we've seen since then about an 80-90% loss of that forest. A lot of the indigenous knowledge has been lost. I think within like 100 years, we had about 90% of the indigenous population either dead or enslaved. But now Brazil has moved forward in this process. We have two major cities, Rio de Janeiro and Sao Paulo, sitting within these boundaries. And so all of the services that this forest once provided, water filtration, all of the economic goods and services, are no longer functioning for them. So it was our task to come into a context which had already been very well developed on the ground. We were coming from the perspective of ecological economics, but already working on the ground were these participatory action research networks, cooperative systems, economic structures. And what we found in this case is that none of these pieces could really work within this system on their own. So oftentimes if you try to have a payments for ecosystem services, this will have all these perverse effects if it's done alone. If we're just trying to transition farmers and work with farmers to develop knowledge without that funding structure and without the economic recognition of the value that these farms can provide to the forest, that also cannot serve alone. So we find this network of processes. And what was kind of a profound realization for me is that this participatory mechanism was a way for people to engage with this community of socio-ecological actors and really start to define that and develop an emergence within that system. And so this was one of the farms, these silvo-pastoral grazing systems and conclusions. Can I turn that off, or should I just? Oh, sorry. So yeah, that's about it. I had a really good time studying this stuff, and they were both really mutually informative for me. And I'm constantly realizing there are so many authors and perspectives that I have not understood fully in my short time. And so I look forward to developing these thoughts more and hearing from you guys.
Is this working? Do I take it your main source of ecological economics was Daly's book?
That was a big one, yeah.
Do you know Mike Common's book?
No.
And I recommend you look at that. And in terms of your participatory appraisal, you could look at a methodology called PANDA,
Okay.
which might help you to bridge that gap between what they do and the more conventional economic stuff.
Okay. Thanks. I'll have to write that down later. Cool. I'm not managing the questions. Yeah.
Before he died, Howard Odum, who was a past president of the society, was very active in ecological economics. Did you look into his modeling programs in systems ecology?
Not enough in depth.
I think they would be very valuable for you if you want to try that too.
Awesome. Yeah, one thing that was interesting for me that I think it came from Odum was the idea that, man optimizes for gross production. Can you guys help me with this? And nature maximizes for, we'll get back to that. But it was interesting, that's one way to define a boundary between what, this system does and what that system does. And there's also an embeddedness that is interesting. Yeah.
I'm interested in how you came across the interest in the laws of form. Like, why did that, given your background, why did that all of a sudden become a focus, and then that understanding of, you know, your perception system?
Yeah. Well, for me, I think it just illustrates what is this kind of second-order understanding in such a clear manner. You know, I think a lot of what systems theory, I'm understanding systems theory as, is this process of understanding how we define an object. You know, that's really what it's all about. Like the isomorphisms, the information theory, we're dealing with different layers of description. And I think for me, laws of form really puts that concisely. So, thanks very much. Okay, I'll let you do this stuff. Cool.
Okay, well, auditory, all right. And I would like to introduce our Mead Award winner today to speak with us, Jacqueline Sombolan.
In front of this very honorable audience. You are all gurus to me. Yeah, and some of you have been cited in my thesis. Thank you very much. And this is part of my PhD project. I'm from Indonesia, but I'm now doing my PhD in Flinders University. And yeah, that's the title, Critical Systems Thinking Review on Decentralized Drinking Water Management in Nauli City. That's a pseudonym, because my supervisor suggested me to use pseudonym rather than real name, because this will be a very sensitive issue in that particular area. I would like to start with our Constitution. Our Constitution clearly states that land, waters, and it didn't say anything about electricity, it didn't say anything about oil, mineral, but water. It says that should be controlled and managed by the government and should be utilized to the greatest benefit of the people. But then, since 1999, we implemented the decentralized system in Indonesia, and the central government started to decentralize, to transfer functions, public utility provision to local governments, including water service. But sadly, these local governments then transfer function further to water companies. And their companies, even though they are solely owned by the local governments, but they are companies. They measure their performance by private sector measurement reports like profit and loss and tariffs and something like that. So in my opinion, this is still a privatization of public provision, more or less. And this is the area, Indonesia, for you that not familiar with Indonesia. And then the area, this province is the driest region in Indonesia, even though we have abundance of water. But this province, sadly, is the driest region. And the driest, the poorest, and has been regarded as the most corrupt area in Indonesia. And previously, there was only one local government in Nauli, the district of Nauli, and its capital city is the sub-district of Nauli. And then in 1999, the sub-district of Nauli proliferated, become a new autonomous local government. So pretty much from this point until the rest of my presentation, I will talk about the competition between these three governments, the provincial government, district governments, and the city government, in providing water, in selling water to the people in that region, in the city of Nauli. A bit of profile of the city of Nauli. This area only has 4 months of raining, and it has 4 months without rain. Population, more than 300,000 people, and more than 10% of them below poverty line. And the government budget was the second lowest among 32 capital cities in Indonesia. So it's very poor. And education level, only 13% have graduated from high school, and then 11% has never finished primary school. So the aim of my paper is to evaluate the effectiveness of the decentralized system of water provision in this city, and then give some recommendation what ought to be done. Yeah, the first step, I consider this problem as a wicked problem, like Rita Lemaiber said, and I want to perceive the problem with 5 different perspectives: politics, health, environment, economics, and social. Data collection, I performed data collection last year in November and December 2015. And findings, this is the area. Previously, there was only one water company in this area, and that belongs and it belongs to the district government, the district government of the district government of Nauli. But then in 2005, the city government started to establish its new water company, and they are starting to compete in selling water to the customers. And there are some gaps there. That gaps are the people that are not covered by these water companies. And in 2011, the provincial government started to establish its own water company. So there are 3 water companies in one region only, and they are all selling waters, not providing waters. And the performance of these 3 water companies, they can only cover less than 40%, that blue area, less than 40% of the people, and the rest 60% have to struggle to find their own water source. And sadly, there are 0.4%, like 1,500 people that cannot have access to clean water. And this is a very fresh opportunity for private sector to sell water. And in 2014, there was opportunity loss. It was 19 billion rupiahs per year, because the people have to buy water from water sector. So if they buy water from the government or public companies, they only have to spend 2 billions, and they spend 21 billions buying water from the private sectors. So there was 19 billion rupiahs opportunity loss. Imagine if in 10 years there are 190 billion rupiahs, or equals $10 billion US dollars. And if someone like Gunter Poli, we invite someone like him to come to Indonesia, and we give him the money, we don't know what sort of innovation that he can do in solving this problem. Yeah, a problem with authorities, they are fighting each other. There are no clear delegation. Who should do what in terms of water provision. And health problems, also very poor, very high facial coliform, and then TDS, the total dissolved solid. It means there are so high mineral contents in the water, and also lowering water table because they are exploiting water from the ground. And from social perspective, people try to find water from unprotected resources. Yeah. And then analysis with 12 heuristic questions. First of all, the source of motivation, beneficiaries, the new system, the beneficiaries of the new system should be all people, not only the customers. And then the purpose to ensure that quantity, quality, and continuity of water provided to the people. And the target, 100% of coverage in 2019, alongside with the Sustainable Development target. The source of power, who should be the decision maker, the governments, and then resources, what kind of resources that they can employ, the financial resources and legal resources, legal power. Environment, things that cannot be controlled by the government, that is the population, geographic, and water source. The source of knowledge, expertise needed, and the source of legitimation. The effective people should be invited also to give their voice to design the new system. Emancipation and worldview, the last one. The new system should be perceived, should consider the natural system, social system, and economic system, because without a good natural system, we cannot have good social system, and without a good social system, we cannot have a good economic system. And all of these three systems should be alongside with the Indonesian Constitution, and then these worldviews should be the basic thinking of how we design the system, the source of motivation. I think that will be all. Thank you.
I noticed you were referencing Janet. Is she your supervisor?
Yes.
Okay. She has a concept called extended pragmatism. Are you familiar with that?
Yes.
I wonder whether you could use that as a way of talking about how you can shift the viewpoint of people who are in authority and also maybe even the private business sector to think of their own pragmatic needs, but to extend it in the way that Janice suggests in her work.
Your initial point was about how water is essentially a public good, and that the government has the obligation to provide it to the people. The sort of ethos that I pick up behind that, the general feeling and general understanding, is different from, or is it, I guess that's my question, different from the general understanding, general feeling behind the situation now where that's been devolved to different government authorities.
Yes.
What can you say something about that? Is there indeed a shift in ethos and general understanding, and what that is from the Constitution to now?
Yes, absolutely. It's a fact that our Constitution clearly states that water, in particular, should be controlled by the government. And it seems that our governments, central government, provincial government, and local governments, forgot this Constitution. And during my fact findings, my field work back home in Indonesia, I interviewed officials from city governments, provincial governments, and central governments, asking about this Constitution, this core idea about managing water. And they said, like virus come into a computer like that, and they said like that. And Constitution, they said, but we need money to invest. We need, but where is the subsidy? Cross subsidy between taking money from the wealthier and then from other sectors to this. I tried to compare the system in Indonesia and in Brazil, where in Brazil they implemented a centralized water system with only one water company belongs to the central government, and we can do electricity nationally. The electricity company belongs to the central government, and we provide huge subsidy in electricity taken from other sectors. So why don't we try this system? Or probably in the Philippines, the water system controlled by the government directly. They don't transfer the function to water companies. So you're very true at this point that our government has shifted their paradigm from treating water as public good to more private good. Thank you.
I think that the last question, your answer probably covered it, but I wanted to ask you how familiar you were with the work in Latin America where they deprivatized. How familiar you were with the work in Latin America where they deprivatized, privatized water system, and where it was a huge scandal and a lot of public protest around that.
Like Oklahoma, Bolivia, maybe.
Yeah.
Yeah, where there are water disaster there. Yeah. Of course, I won't take that as an example. I just want to pick up success story from Latin America and brought that to the government as a comparison. Thank you.
Gary Metcalf from the U.S. Let me ask a different level of question, which may be either ignorant or unfair, but I would like your perspective. So in thinking about the dilemma, one perspective might be that maybe it's not such a good idea for people to be living in a place which is so difficult, so dry, so hard to furnish the amount of water that people really need from a larger perspective. The other is that because people live there, there's really a responsibility for government and larger entities to provide the basic services that people need. If you step back and try to think about a larger solution, given all the factors and climate change and everything going on in the world, would you lean one way or the other in terms of a really long-term solution that would be sustainable? So is it really better to try to make sure that wherever people live, they're provided the most essential services they need, regardless of the conditions? Or from a really long-term sustainability perspective, should we be moving not to have people living in the most difficult places where it is so energy intensive to provide those sources?
Thank you very much for the question. It's a new idea actually. And I will take that into consideration. Thank you. Thanks very much. Thanks very much. And thank you for the award.
How about now? Audibler? All right, I'll take that. Okay. How many students are in the room at this moment? Excellent. Okay. All right. John has asked me to talk to you. If the rest of them want to eavesdrop, I'm okay with that. But my main intention is to speak with you. We have been oriented for most of this week to try to understand and be concerned about and think about all the systems that are out there. I'm going to talk about something that's not generally addressed at scientific conferences such as this, which is to ask you to shift your attention now to your interiority. So we're going to try to look at ourselves from a systemic perspective, looking on the inside. So let me tell you about my student journey. In the 1990s, I was sitting in an MBA classroom about a 15-hour drive north from here in Western Canada. And I was taking a course on organizational theory, and I was really excited about this because finally I was going to learn how to fix these disastrous systems called organizations, several of which, crappy ones, I had been recently working in. So I was really looking forward to this, and the textbook we had to buy for this course was called Deep Change. And the premises of this book changed my life, and I have not been the same since. So the book was called Deep Change, and you're saying, yeah, she's going to tell us about this because the world really needs deep change. Robert Quinn, professor from University of Michigan who wrote the book, had a bit of a different idea in mind. I'm going to read you a passage from his book. I thought he was going to be telling me about organizations, but instead I read this. You are a system based on systems of external and internal expectations. All these expectations help ensure you will exhibit predictable behavior that initially make you more efficient or effective. As time goes on, however, your routine patterns move you towards decay and stagnation. You lose alignment with the changing external reality. When internal and external alignment is lost, there is a choice. Either adapt, make deep change, or take the road to slow death. Deep change or slow death. Deep change requires new ways of thinking and behaving. It is change that is major in scope, discontinuous with the past, and generally irreversible. Deep change involves taking risks. It means surrendering control. Most of us build our identity around our knowledge and our competence and employing certain knowledge or certain known techniques or abilities. Making a deep change, though, involves abandoning both and walking naked into the land of uncertainty. This is usually a terrifying choice. It is therefore natural for each of us to deny that there is any real need for deep change. Usually when an external alignment gets lost, you can be renewed, energized, or made effective only if something in you is willing to take some big risks by stepping outside the well-defined boundaries. When this happens, you're lured, pushed, or pulled into unknown territory. The resulting journey through the unknown is a terrifying experience, with the possibility of failure or death a reality rather than a metaphor. At such times, we face wicked problems, problems for which there are not existing answers. Facing imminent danger, we must learn our way forward, continually creating new possible solutions and inventive systems of organizing, systems that are aligned with today's, not yesterday's needs. So this week we've heard a lot about the needs for the world to change, and while I've been listening to all of that, I've been hearing the message that each of us needs deep change. The radical change we need out there, in fact, cannot happen unless there is commensurate change in here. So from Gunter Pauli, we learn about a turning point in his life that turned him into a disturber, he said. I want people to feel uncomfortable and be unliked. That's the only way to make change, is to create discomfort, he says. Josh Tewksbury told us that he works on the edges between communities, and his definition of being on the edge is making everybody a bit angry. If you're going to disturb the world, you're going to find detractors. Count on them. In fact, it's probably a sign that you're doing something right. And so there's something very exhilarating and noble about the work before us. And so John, I think, has created a really exhilarating conference for us, saturated in noble ideas, big ideas. But if you look at the description that he put in your program for this section, it's not just the big ideas he's talking about, but he's talking about, how did he say it? How will student researchers navigate the treacherous waters ahead? He told me this was supposed to be an uplifting talk, so let me see what I can do here. Yes, the prospects of being change agents, particularly deep change agents, is gonna feel intimidating. And to the extent that you're invested in a status quo that serves you well, or at least keeps you fairly comfortable, the need for deep change when it comes upon you will be challenging. But let us step back in a moment, not to avoid the threat, but to sufficiently ground ourselves to meet it. We are students living in this earth at this time, beholding these pretty treacherous waters that are ahead. And at times, of course, we're going to quake at that treachery. But I'm going to point out that treachery, the definition of treachery, it involves a sense of betrayal. Lots of stories in this room about people feeling betrayed. And the root, the etymology of betrayal has to do with being handed over to a messy situation. Being handed over. Fortunately, my friends, messy situations are exactly what we are in the business of learning how to address. So, okay, it's hard. It's going to be difficult. So what? Let's roll up our sleeves and let's get at it, damn it. Sometimes you just got to dive in. So, we're in the business of sciences of wholeness. That has been John's theme this week. And wholeness, whole systems are so immeasurably complex that engaging with them has the experience, the felt experience of being the presence of something that is transcending us by forces greater than what we can understand, greater than what we can control. And so we tend to experience that by feeling small, puny even, by feeling awe, by feeling overwhelmed. So here's what your schools have taught you to do, students, those of us in classes. Here's what your schools have taught you to do. To develop your thinking apparatus so strongly and so rigorously that you are exceptional thinkers. But I argue that wicked problems will not be successfully met by compartmentalized humans. They demand we develop every part of our humanity. As the native elders told us earlier this week, if the air's sick, we get sick. I'm going to riff off of that. If your thinking function is overdeveloped relative to the rest of you, the wholeness that you are will be distorted. So too will be the capacities you can bring to bear on the whole systems that need our help. The ecological systems, the governance systems, the economic systems, the cultural systems that we've heard about all week. So the demands are urgent, and these times demand that we bring our whole selves to bear on the problems that face us. Wholeness is every bit of your logical, rational mind. Wholeness is your passionate heart who loves this earth so much it rips your chest open at moments with raw vulnerability and ache and horror and terrible grief at what we've done to this planet. One of the Wild Foundation panelists says it demands our atonement. And wholeness is also your unconscious mind, which is much maligned by Freud. Wholeness is your shadow, a psychological term also tended to be misrepresented as a malign force, but what Jung meant by shadow was the parts of ourselves that we've repressed, The parts that make us feel awkward or unacceptable, the parts that make us feel like we're kind of too much for other people to handle. Your shadow is also the repository of all manner of human capabilities and creativity, the likes of which you have never imagined yourself capable of. And we need resources that transcend our current imagining. So this morning we're thinking about capacity building. And capacity building usually is framed as helping people to have more knowledge. I argue that it's that and it's something more. It's also about your skills, your capabilities. In particular, it's about what you perceive that others can't. If you think about it, it's quite a mental leap to see a system amidst a bunch of disparate parts separated by time and space. Not everybody can perceive that. You can. So we need to have some competencies. Competency number one for systems people is to be able to perceive order. We have, in particular, yesterday's plenary, an array of people in the society working at perceiving order amidst the varying, the plethora of systems theories that currently exist. And often the thrill of systems research is discovering order wherever others have not. Another competency is trying to find out how to deal with the unknown. The sense of being in the presence of the unknown is quite intrinsic to research. Quite intrinsic to research when we're dealing with complex systems. We can talk about, well, what are the things we don't know? But that puts the focus on the outside. Again, I'm focusing on the interiority. Handling your interior experience of the unknown is crucial. And it's a place where researchers can operate really competently or really badly. As an aside, please buy the book that we recently wrote with Chapter 7, fabulous chapter on how to deal well with uncertainty and how to botch it up. But I digress. Some things that psychology tells us about how to cope with the unknown. We have to be polychronous. We have to have polychronicity. That's it. Too early in the morning. Polychronicity is the term that talks about the ability to cope well in stimulus-rich, information-rich environments. Doesn't that sound like a complex system? Many people are not polychronous. We need to be. We also hear from psychology the importance of tolerance of ambiguity. Complex systems are subtle, and I would argue that we need to have the ability not just to tolerate ambiguity, but to attune exquisitely to it. So being a system researcher involves the capacity to take in a great deal of information, more than most researchers will even try. And it involves the capacity to skillfully engage with that information while experiencing and holding the tensions of divergent data, puzzling paradoxes, absolute incommensurabilities. Not easy stuff. So it takes a lot of work, and it takes sustained attention. It takes a lot of endurance to be a systems researcher. And I argue that the best way that you're going to be able to do that or sustain your ability to do that is to become intimately acquainted with the best systems research tool you've got, and that is your own perceptual apparatus. How you think, how you feel, how you take in information, your strengths, your skills, your vulnerabilities, your challenges. That's your instrument. And so, to meet the deep, deep challenges in our midst, and mostly assuredly those that are ahead, I argue that the systemic skills are needed to meet the world's challenges, and we've got to be better at them than most people are. We are better at them than most people are. And the second thing you need is a group of other people sufficiently committed to you and to each other to help you meet those challenges. You cannot do this on your own. Here's some really good news that I just read last week. According to the Future of Life Institute calculations they completed, 90% of the scientists who ever lived are alive today. Which means that never before have we had so many people whose sole purpose of work is to better understand how the world works. This is good news. The capacities necessary are demanding. This is going to take all you've got, and much you're not even conscious yet that you're capable of doing. So I started with the idea of interiority. I want to end with the idea of together. We've got to do this together. And if I were to ask people to stand up in this room, people who have made a life-changing difference in my own ability to try to be a good systems researcher, more people in this room would be standing and sitting than sitting. We've got to do this. We've got to do it together, and I'm looking forward to working with you on it. Thank you. I guess we have a moment or two for questions. Questions, comments, arguments. Hi, Pam.
Hi. I just want to say thank you. You know, as a new student in system science, and yesterday, especially when we heard the morning and about these different philosophical views and how they don't align, and when you're a new student, you're trying to align them, and you know, it's hard. And so I was overwhelmed. I felt very overwhelmed yesterday, and maybe just a little of the tarnished my excitement that I have for systems. But what you just said is really, really good, because it isn't going to be easy, and there are going to be paradoxes, and so it gives me, you know, I'm kind of flipped around and going, yeah, damn right.
Damn right.
We got to all go after that. But so thank you. I thought it was a really, really good, and it was inspirational. Thanks.
Good. The really good news, Pam, is that all of those people who you saw up there yesterday have been working on this for decades. They find it overwhelming, too. I've talked to most of them.
Yes, I'll second this opinion. I thought that this was a very, very necessary presentation, and because of its psychological connotations and even this necessity of finding strengths in ourselves that we didn't know we had. The other one is going back to your slide on what constitutes a student, somebody who goes to school. If you would bring that up, if you know where it is.
Definition, yes.
Yeah, I was studying at a school or a college. They noticed someone was studying in order to enter a particular profession, a person who takes an interest in a particular subject. I'm very keen on etymology, and the etymology of the word school from, yes, Latin schola, but also from the Greek scholi, which means leisure. So in order to be a student, one cannot continue with what is happening in the United States anymore, of having students be working to make an income to continue with their lives, as at a time when they need to have a leisure to be able to concentrate entirely on these endeavors that you have given us, which are very profound endeavors, and society needs to make a space where that is really possible to go to those depths. Because what I find with my own students, they're terribly distracted by how to make a living while at the same time going to school. And I think that is a terrible decision that our society has taken in the last 40 years.
I can say that my greatest moments of despair this week have been the moments when it just hits me with full force. I don't have enough time. I don't have enough time to teach my students and grade thousands of pages of assignments and do the research that I want to be doing. And so to try and compartmentalize my life, and yet that's just the same as trying to pull apart a system, the system of my life. So how to integrate that? I can only say that the place I'm at where that is a regular battle with despair. But I continue to work on it because I must, and my situation is not the only one.
Hi, Sue Gabriel, everyone. Thank you, Pam. It was just heartwarming. how you spoke, and it made me evolve a thought that I've heard often in our society, where we say we don't design for others, we design with others. That's somehow wasn't quite complete for me, so I'm going to take it a step further. We design for ourselves. And then I think we shift back and forth. We design with others, we design for ourselves, because that's the complexity of it. So I don't go out and design with others like a hit and run. I design in my own communities.
Thank you.
Thank you. I completely resonate with you. And what I think is the huge challenge for this society is to focus on the most complex and sustainable system that is the human being. And in order to do this, I think we have to understand that to make a whole, we have to accept what we are, but we also have to accept inside us what we are not. So it's the key to understand that we have available all the wisdom, all the knowledge, and we only have to link with it, but inside. Thank you.
Thank you. There are a couple of gentlemen farther back.
Thanks. It's Jim Best from Saybrook University. There's such a shift between the San Jose conference that I was at 4 years ago and this one, and I just really congratulate everybody that's been working to open it up in these ways, especially the way you've brought, this personal aspect this year. So 2 questions for you. One, I run into a bunch of people that are systems thinkers that are out there isolated. And when I talk to them, they go, oh, thank God, there's somebody to talk to. And they're isolated, and it's very difficult to get that support that you were talking about that we need for them. Do you have any ideas about systematic ways that we might offer that kind of support to them? That's the first question. Second one is, if in fact we all of our intelligence needs to be brought forth, and it's a piece of work. It's a piece of work. We've got leisure here as students to be going through this process. Requires a lot of resource, our families, our community. If everybody needs to be going through that process, and the process is self-reflection, to really bring ourselves forth, what kind of ideas do you have about doing that on a large scale?
Okay, let me make sure I get both of those questions. I resonate with the people who work in isolation. You're from Saybrook. Bless you. I went to the University of Calgary, where nobody thought or talked about systems. And it was happenstance where somebody sent my paper to somebody over in Vermont who happened to say, I have no clue what to do with this, who happened to hand it to somebody named Alan Combs, who said, this kid ought to go to a systems conference. I was the only student who came to the 2001 systems conference in Asilomar. And as I was standing towards the end of the conference and people were leaving, and there were kind of tears in my eyes because I was thinking, amazing that this happened, Len Troncalli walked up to me and said, you ask good questions. Don't let the buggers at your university get you down. Talk about statements that can change a life. So I think Josh Tewksbury told us earlier this week, the problem is not communication anymore. We've got ways to communicate. I think Future Earth seems to be a wonderful way to start to link people who are working in different ways. And I think as systems people here, we've got a responsibility to live out loud, to talk about and think about and speak about the ways what we do has something to do with something called systems, so that other people can start to make those links too. I'll just say very quickly, your second question was to do with how to analyze, how to That's a fabulous question, but I want to sit on it, so let's find a time to talk later. Probably the answer is my future research program is going to try and answer that, but I'll try to find some clear language about that. Ray?
Thanks very much, Ray Eisen. It was a great talk, Pam. And I want to pick up on actually the how one deals with the context to enable what you're suggesting. And at the risk of being a poor guest in a university and a country, I'd like to suggest that the statement that was put out by the group yesterday, as valid as it is, that there is another form of feedback we could give, and that is the inadequacies of the architectures of this whole campus for building the reflexivity and the type of relational dynamics that you're advocating.
Thank you. You know, the universities, the infrastructures, physical and otherwise, that we live in, we're not built with much reflexivity in mind. Not at all. Thank you. I think Shankar had one final question we'll take and then switch. But he's doing such a great job with that running.
Sorry, you're welcome. Hi, my name is Shankar. I come from Australia. I happen to teach mostly postgraduate students. I don't teach undergraduate students or graduate students as in the US. And I happen to teach mostly practitioners. And so, Alex, I agree that leisure is important, but for the type of students I engage with, work is very important. And I learn more from them than teach them at all. Because I'm away from practice. I used to be a project manager. I'm not anymore, but I'm trying to teach a practice that they are actually practicing. So actually I learn from students as well. But the question of leisure is an interesting one because we used to bring students to a block workshop away from their work so that they can concentrate on the teaching. But nowadays with the internet, it's almost impossible for them to be away from work. The internet has caused another kind of issue where the leisure is still being further curtailed, I think. Yeah,
I don't know what the answer is, but there's got to be some shift from compartmentalizing lives to integrating, but integrating in a way that's not about constant distraction and half attention at everything that we're doing. And I don't know what the answer is to that, but we have to cultivate the ability for clearer and more direct presence, even though we're involved in a lot of different spheres of life. Give me a few years, I'm going to work on that problem, I'll get back to you. So with that, I'm going to draw a close to my talk as we get Delia set up for hers. I just want to take a moment for something I think we've missed, which is to give a round of applause to the phenomenal tech experts who have been running around and helping us all throughout the week. So thank you. You guys do it. Turn this off.
Good morning, everyone. I have a really big clock just here so that I'm going to be on time. Perfect. Yeah, that's good. Okay. Just wait for this. So, my name is Delia, and I've been given a very big honour and privilege to be able to do the Ranulph Glanville Memorial Lecture. And it is with humility that I actually will be doing this today. There are several people in the room here who knew Ranulph very closely and very personally. And but for those who didn't know Ranulph, let's see if we get his beautiful picture up on the screen. It hasn't come up. Okay, great. He was a cybernetician, he was a designer, he was an artist, and he was a great orator. And he was someone who basically managed to put design, systems, and cybernetics together. He was the Professor of Innovation at the Royal London School of Art, but he passed away in December 2014. He was also one person who wasn't really big into slides, apparently. He didn't really like slides very much. And so I'm going to just try and do pictures, mainly. This talk was basically presented as the importance of collaboration and connection for student research. Now, Alec over there basically said, hey, you know, what is a student? And that came up in a conversation last year when the very first PhD student group came through. And all of us who weren't in the student PhD group want to be part of it because we all still felt that we were students. And then Shankar up there was also saying that even as a teacher, we also learn quite a lot from the students. And for me, I find myself that I am the research instrument. And so therefore, I'm always learning. I learn from every single person that I walk down the street and I talk to them. And so therefore, that's why I was looking at the connecting and collaborating in a networked world. The other thing that came up to me as well was like, how can you actually collaborate if you haven't connected first? Okay? I mean, if you haven't connected, I mean, what am I collaborating with? So that was another reason why I changed the, sort of the topic. So one of the reasons where I have my connection with Ranulph, which is quite personal and very, very meaningful to me, was that in 2014, I basically put forward my very first abstracts for the ISSS conference and also for the American Society for Cybernetics. And, I got asked to sort of like redo my abstract for the American Society for Cybernetics, and which was great. I loved it. I was jumping around going, oh my God, I've been accepted. And it was this very, very cool. But the way that they had actually done the system in 2014 was that once you got accepted, you had to put the abstract up onto the system, and everyone within the conference had to peer review the paper and leave a comment. Only one person left a comment for me. That was Ranulph. And so I was doing the boundary triage, controlling the man and the machine. And I was also looking at the boundary, and I hadn't actually come across laws of form. So I think it's very, very interesting that, yeah, this is becoming quite a big topic at the moment. I'm finding lots and lots of people within the community who I'm going to be able to network with. So, but this was quite good, where Ranulph basically said, he pointed me through to George Spencer Brown, who I hadn't looked at, because I was looking specifically at critical systems thinking. I was looking specifically at system sciences. And so I was stuck in my own bubble. Okay, so, and he basically connected with me and opened up my world to new areas. Now, what you don't see there is that I created a relationship. I then responded back to him and said, thank you, I'm going to look into it and I'll keep in touch. Now, I think that's a really important part when we're connecting to get to the collaborating part. So what is a network?
That, right there.
What's that right there?
It's places where people connect. It's spaces between different bits where there's a lot of rich stuff happening in the spaces between.
Okay, Jacqueline, what do you think it is?
Yeah, I think pretty much the same.
So a network is that. It looks pretty static to me, though. Okay? And that's sort of like a normal standard network diagram. So this is what we see on LinkedIn. Okay, this is who knows of LinkedIn? Who's on LinkedIn? Can I have a raise of hands? Brilliant. If you're not on LinkedIn, please get on LinkedIn and link yourselves in with everyone else, please. But this is Chris Howitt. I don't know him personally, but that's his social network. Okay, so these are all the links that he has. And the green areas and the blue areas, these are basically the areas of expertise. And as you can see, they sort of like clump. But once again, this is all incredibly static. So, and if we're talking about systems thinking says that we must define a boundary, or a system has a boundary. Where is the boundary? Can anyone answer? Can someone tell me where the boundary is in this network? I'm going to get my... I'm going to clip-clop up the stairs otherwise.
The boundary depends on the purpose and who's involved in the boundary judgments. And so if it is the actor themselves, Chris Howitt, a boundary judgment could be, from their perspective in reflection, the set of networks of connections that are enacted on a daily basis or a weekly basis or a monthly basis. Or alternatively, we could, as an outside observer, say it's the set of connections that are enacted in a given year or a given bit of time, depending on what our purpose was in analysing the system of interest.
Thank you, Ray. Sorry, but I'll take you on. Okay, so I'm a student of Gerald Midgley's, and in his book, Systems, Intervention and Practice, 2000, boundary may be key. That was one of the key statements that he said. And I got very, very, very interested in this boundary concept. Because you're quite right, it is in that system and purpose and who's connected. But then what happens when you create that boundary? What are you excluding? What are you including? And when you make that exclusion, what are you going to miss? What's going to happen when you're not looking? Who's going to be looking at it when you're not looking at it? And so, so this is a very key thing. And I also wanted to find out exactly how do boundaries come to life? And so then that's how my boundary triage came up. But I'm not going to present that today because that's not what we're talking about today. So what I'm talking about today is that we're actually bounded. There is something inside of us that's making all these decisions about the boundaries, but we're bounded and bounded and bounded in so many different ways. And we're not just bounded by our thinking. We're also bounded by the systems of our body. We have a physiological body here that gets too hot, it gets too cold, it gets tired, I get thirsty, I need to go to the toilet, or I'm hungry. Sometimes I feel a very negative atmosphere. All of these things are going to affect how I think. My systems thinking is going to be affected by that noise. And there's another unseen boundary, the time boundary. So if I'm time-bound, like I've got now 10 minutes, I'm time-bound. And so I'm going to be looking at that. Or if we need to go and catch a bus, and we're talking to someone, we're not listening to that other person. We're not going to be able to relate. So all of a sudden, our system isn't going to be able to actually think properly or absorb information properly. And the other thing that is a system that I've been trying to grapple with personally, is the emotional system. Okay. Past few months, I've actually been asking myself, why the hell do we have an emotional system? You know, because it can swing from left to right to left to right. But for those who are, for me, I find that cybernetics helps. Okay, cybernetics helps because it makes me stop and look beyond it helps me steer through the emotions and actually look beyond and look at the purpose and the action. So when I have one negative emotion or feeling sad, I can sort of go, wait a minute, is that useful? I'm going to listen to that. But I'm not going to take it on board. I'm not going to sit in that. And if I'm happy, I'm sort of thinking, well, am I being over-positive in that point? Am I in my bubble? Do I need to look at the other side and just keep on, steering that through? And there's a little acronym that has, that a research team back in Australia called the Digital Explorers have come up with. And it's called Lovers See. And so instead of looking at emotions, which I think there's about 130 emotions, and sorry, that's values. So in values, it's 130 values. But emotions can basically change how you value things. And those values will change, yet again, how you think and how you relate and how you are. And so all these systems, what we want to try and achieve in here and how we're going to change, well, then we really need to start looking at those value systems and how the emotions are affecting those value systems. So it's all tied in. So, where am I going? Too many computers. So, this is what I sometimes find, especially with systems engineers, but this uncontrollable urge to show people better ways of doing things. And that's another thing that I sort of find that we've got to be a little bit careful with as a system scientist, is that we do have uncontrollable urges to show people better ways of doing things. But when we do that, we stop to listen. And we stop to ask questions. I'm not going to say too much about that. That came from one of my digital explorers when I was introducing them to system sciences. And, but I do think we do need to think about that one. So there's been a lot about talk about love in a lot of these presentations. And I like love. I think love's a great thing. It's a really good thing. But how do I do love? Does anyone have a... Okay, so I'm going to ask someone up here, because she looks like she needs a bit of loving. Here we go. No? You do a lot of loving. Right. Could you tell me how we do love?
What?
How do we do love?
Oh, we love with the heart. And when a lot of emotion, and then a lot of conscious.
And how do you show it?
Talking or showing only my feelings.
So you're showing your feelings?
Mm-hmm. Yes.
Okay. Anyone else like to say how they show love? Yeah? Over here.
Embracing the world.
And how do you do that?
Embracing everybody.
So that's action, right?
I think being open. And when you were talking about emotion, to really kind of dissolve the boundaries that we hold within ourselves. So as those boundaries dissolve, as you can be open to the world, to me that's the root, the foundation of loving others. So how that expresses, I think Louis' right, embracing, literally embracing others.
Okay, that's excellent. And I think this is really, really good. But what happens when we're scared? What happens when we're not feeling safe? Can we do love, do you think? I'll go on the other side. Do you think we can... Okay, I'm going to do a show of hands. If you're not feeling safe, how do you think we can show love? Put your hands up. Who says yes? Ooh. So you can show love if you aren't feeling safe, if I'm not feeling safe. Okay. Yeah, sorry. Okay. Because when you're not... Okay, so one of the things that I'm going to just put to you, just something to explore, is that when we're not feeling safe, what does one tend to do when you're not feeling safe? I can see some symbols of hands closing. Sorry. Any comments? Sorry, what did you say?
Boundaries.
Yes, boundaries. Okay, so we want to have all this love, and we think we're always going to be loving, but we are a physical system and we're a human system, and at the moment we're always thinking about the systems thinking, okay, but we are a system. Okay, we want and have intention for love, but we often feel unsafe. And when we're feeling unsafe, we put up a boundary. We do fight or flight. We stop to listen. We stop understanding another person. We stop valuing what another person has to say because we're so busy protecting our own ideas, our own thoughts, that we stop and we don't even know we're doing it. That's the thing, we don't even know we're doing it. And so when we're talking about this change, okay, I'm thinking, right, then we need to have a little bit of a stop and think, right, how do I feel at this very moment in time? I tell you, I'm scared. I am scared right now. But the thing is, what I need to do is I need to talk to myself and say, why am I scared? Because I've got all these friends in front of me. And you're friends. And you're not just a network. You're a system. You're a system because you're giving me input and you're helping me become a person. And I'm going to be an output. And I'm going to go into the world. And I'm going to be able to talk to other people. And I'm going to be systemically passing on a message. And each and every one of you are going to be doing that as well. And I think that sometimes what we need to do is, if we're going to do love, like do it, what we need to do is listen. Listen to other people without judgment, without an agenda. Be quiet. Ask questions. And create that dialogue. And that was something that was very big that Ranulph was really into as well. Dialogue. Really having dialogue. So, this perception is reality is a comment that was made in May 2016, and it really disturbed me because thinking perception isn't reality. Not in my mind. So I just sort of think, just as an exploration, just because I don't know the answer, I'm still going through with my research with this, and we've had some really interesting results. But and I'm incredibly grateful to a small team in Brisbane and in Sydney, and actually who have been working with me and have really trusted me and have become partners, not just friends but partners and co-collaborators in developing a system and exploring how our physiological, our emotional system actually affects our thinking and decisions, and also how we relate to one another. And I think that's probably something that we haven't really talked about as well, is that in a system we need to be relating, and that's a two-way process, okay? Which I'm not doing currently right now. So this was one of... Hey! So I'm just going to go back over here. This is... I'm going to just show a little bit of relating going on. Hello there, how are you?
A little bit nervous all of a sudden.
My name's Delia, what's yours?
My name is Patricia.
And what do you do?
I draw on walls, but mostly I listen.
Do you get an opportunity to ask questions?
Could you repeat that?
Okay. So, Patricia. So anyway, basically, I'm going to, and do you remember Ranulph's talk, this one?
Oh, yes.
Would you be able to tell us a little bit about it?
Well, there I drew a picture of him. That's great. Okay. This is going to take me a second. A way of being in the world that we cannot wow, it kind of goes back to what the last talk was about, which was being having a self-awareness and being part of the system. The pattern, that finding the patterns is being aware of the noun and the verb, of the being. And that the model is not the world itself. I remember that very clearly. Beautiful, thank you.
Okay, and so yeah, so it is a way of being. We are the system. And we are the boundary. We're the ones that create the boundaries. We are the ones that create the constraints. We're the ones that get to choose whether we're going to be the input, the output, the process, the flow. It's our choice. And it's not a choice one or the other. I personally believe we have the potential, or that we are, all of these things happening at the same time. We just have to open our minds to it a little bit and just, understand that, like Ray said earlier, it's like when we do our purpose and our action, that's why we define our boundaries, so we've got something to aim for, that we can steer towards that. But it isn't the boundary. That isn't the boundary. That isn't the system. We are the system. And actually, we are not the system really either. Because when we've got purposefulness and action, we become an us. It moves from a me, I, a you, a we-ness, to an us-ness. And an us-ness is a lot more powerful than a we-ness. So I'm going to show you something. This is, I was trying to find an image that basically described a network and collaboration. Now this is a GIF. Does everyone know what a GIF is? Okay, it's a moving picture made up of several images. And what you can't see is that there's 60 GIFs. And I think that this actually properly represents how we are as a network, where we are just like little dots and constellations. If we have a look at, GIF 2021, it goes into a little bit of darkness. And then we have like little dots of light. Hello. And then we all start to connect, and we get brighter, and we get brighter, and we get brighter. And then we get this. So that's me finished. I would like, if there's any questions about being a system, being a flow, being the network, please let me know.
Jason from Arizona. Thank you for a wonderful talk. As you are talking, I was trying to send you an email asking you how you did that wonderful network graph. And what I found is in the conference textbook, this Bible, cannot find your email. And you mentioned LinkedIn, and so I tried to get into LinkedIn. And I have a problem of forgetting passwords. So this is my travel computer. I'm kind of cut off by my own boundary of forgetting passwords. So when you say we need a boundary, and when you say that you suggest that we love when we already feeling threatened. A keyword coming into mind is how about the terrorists? And how about the people they determined to destroy this civilization? And how are we going to build up the boundary or what?
I feel like I'm running for president. In terms of those boundaries, we need to also look at the other perspective. If we have a look at the terrorists, there's so many different things that you can look at, but at the University of Hull, we have people who are studying who've come from Libya during the uprising and the refugees. And one of the things, and as I said, this is when we're talking about love, is the practical way of doing it is to listen and to ask the question so you've got something to listen to, and to really ask what they were seeing, because what we see on TV and what is reported is not real. It's only partial. And so therefore sometimes I think I think there's a really good clip on YouTube where there's a CIA agent talking about how she was interviewing the terrorists. And she was saying that basically they're just rebels because what the analogy that she gave was it was like Star Wars. So you've got the great big empire trying to bomb everyone and everything, and that actually the terrorists aren't actually the terrorists, they're actually the rebels trying to save their freedom. So I can't actually respond, sort of like give you an answer to that question because I'm not in that area. But what I'm trying to say is we need to have a look at our own perspectives, what we're listening to, especially in an information era where information is just being passed through the system and people are sharing things and sometimes not even reading them. And because we trust a person, we believe it, even though we don't even know where that person got their information from. And so I suppose the point I'm trying to say here is in this networked world, we have more and more and more responsibility to try and find out what the source is and to find out what our own perspectives are and why and how we got them. That's it. Yes.
So getting back to your frustration about networks being static, I actually talked to a few people this week about how it'd be great to be able to visualize them as journeys, right? So we're not dots and straight line connections. But I have a journey or a path that got me to this point in time. Where my path goes in the future might be influenced by a conversation I had with you or a relationship I had with you, or I might veer off this way because I had a negative reaction. But if we could visualize networks more dynamically in the sense that the positive things that come from relationships, which is the whole point, can have ramifications for your individual system, changing paths. And it would be great with all the great visualization that we have now in these technologies. It'd be great if we could try to find ways to visualize some of these things just a little differently. It seems a challenge, but that would be really cool.
Yeah, I think we're going to get there, especially because we're all connecting and collaborating now.
Elena Leonard, Toronto. As I look at the slide up there, I think of Buckminster Fuller and how he said all systems are parallelograms, and how he asked us to try to find a world that works for everyone. And obviously the fact that we have terrorism, crime, a lot of these dysfunctional behaviors is because obviously the world isn't working for everyone. And some people don't have a constructive way of addressing it, or they get to the point where they don't see any other way but the way they are working. And I think it's part of our understanding to look and see ourselves as one of those lines, like an disintegration, connecting different nodes and seeing what we can do to make those boundaries, values, opportunities for love and understanding a little more clear.
I'm just going to...
David Ng, student at Aalto University. So I've been doing some reading extending Bateson's thinking, and I think that we need to reframe the way we're looking at this. Tim Ingold has been doing work, and we should not be thinking about points. We should be thinking about lines, because each of us is moving in time and moving in place, and that means that we're not looking at networks, we're looking at meshworks where people intersect with each other in periods of time. So for those of you who haven't seen Tim Ingold's work, a lot of it on YouTube, some really good books, and he extends the work of Bateson.
Thank you for that pointer, because that's a good point. Anyone?
Thank you very much. And what I think that is a good thing to communicate is the importance of our thoughts and also our emotions, our system. For example, our emotions emit some hormones I don't know how the system of endocrinologia, endocrine system, and love is an energy, and our thoughts are energy, and our words are energy, and we can create love with the intention in the heart. We unify those energies with the positive intention, and we can create love. So, thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.
And thank you for honoring Ranulph in that way today. So we want to respect the system that is your body and its need to probably get up, stand up, have some coffee. Please join us back in 15 minutes where we're going to have a rip-rousing presentation from our students. See you soon.